I also want to start by putting a warning on this conversation. We're going to be dealing with some very serious and confronting adult themes. I say goodbye to these people, I order an Uber, I leave the venue and I walk towards the part of the street where Ubers and cabs are picking people up. Then everything goes black from there. I jolt awake and everything is as clear as day and I am gasping for air. Hello, Lib.
Good morning.
We're going to jump straight into this one today. There's going to be no top and tail. I hope that's okay.
It's more than fine.
I also want to start by putting a warning on this conversation. We're going to be dealing with some very serious and confronting adult themes. So please be aware of that, and no offence will be taken if you can't listen or you need to switch off at any point. So I come across as a pretty happy-go-lucky person, I think it's fair to say, who on the surface appears to live a reasonably easy life. But the truth is, like most people, I've dealt with a few traumatic events in my life, which we've probably alluded to vaguely in the past, but we've never really discussed this matter until now. So on Australia Day in 2019, I was sexually and physically assaulted. I wasn't raped, thank God. I want to make that very clear. And the police believe an item of clothing potentially helped me avoid the rape, which I'll touch on later. It's probably the only funny part of the story, and
absolutely.
it's just so on brand for me. What I take away from the ordeal was that I was really unlucky on that day, but also I was incredibly lucky at the same time because I could have been killed. I truly and honestly could have. In fact, a few days after my incident, a college student in the US faced a near identical experience and was killed. And seeing that story on the news was an incredibly sobering moment for me at that time. The reason I'm talking about this now, 6 years on, is because there hasn't really been a right time to talk about it before now. About 2 years after the assault, I was going to discuss the incident publicly, and I asked the detective senior constable on my case if that was okay, because I wasn't sure of the legalities associated with an open case, which mine still is. Now, my perpetrator has never actually been identified, so the detective on my case thought it might actually be beneficial to publicise my experience because someone might hear about it and come forward with information that we don't have. But I didn't end up pushing forward with that plan. And now with this podcast as a platform, and also on the back of some disappointing election promises around violence against women, I knew this was perhaps my moment to speak up. You know, maybe I can be an advocate for change. I can potentially help victims feel supported and seen. And I'm in a really great place mental health-wise, which was always very important to me if I spoke about this. All right, so where to begin? Now, I've made notes, which I'm going to refer to quite strongly because I think it's important for me to get the details right. So please excuse me if I keep referring to them. And Lib, please interject at any time because you were there and you lived it with me. I actually looked back at notes. Surprise, surprise, I made notes in my phone at the time and pictures from around the incident and was able to refresh my memory on everything, which was quite confronting, as you'd imagine. I'll talk through my memories of that time. And as I said, Lib, jump in whenever you want because you were very much a part of this horrific journey. So I went out with some girlfriends to a popular bar in St Kilda in Melbourne on Australia Day in 2019, and it was during the day. It was the Saturday of the long weekend, and I remember the weather being beautiful. It was perfect. I had a lot of life admin to get through the next day, so I decided to do something a bit unusual for me then at the ripe old age of 32, which was my sort of party period, and that was to take it easy and be responsible. I paced myself with drinks. I had a water after every alcoholic beverage, and I ate a pizza midway through the day to keep the stomach lined. I had my bank card with me, but I didn't have Apple Pay set up on my phone at that time. So my credit card was my only mode of payment that day. And this will all make sense because I know these seem like weird, trivial details. I was at this venue for around 8 hours and I had 5 drinks across that time. That's my recollection, and that's what my bank statement reflected the next day. Now, 5 drinks may sound like a lot to some people. It was across 8 hours, but I was a bit of a binge drinker at this point of my life. I think it's safe to say, don't you, Liv?
Mm-hmm.
I loved a shot. I never drank water, but I never drank till blackout or vomiting. I knew what I could drink. I always made sure I had a friend with me. I always got home safely with all my belongings. But the number of drinks I could consume was quite a lot, which is certainly nothing to be proud of. I want to make that very clear. Anyway, very ironically on this day, I wanted to ensure I woke up the next morning hangover free, so I was pacing myself. All was going well, and at about 11 p.m, my girlfriends decided they wanted to change venues. I was going to join them, but as we were leaving, a group of people from Adelaide arrived and they begged me to stay for one more drink. So I said I was going to stay at this St Kilda venue and would let my friends know later if I was going to join them. I stay with this group for about an hour. We're dancing, I'm back and forward to the bar drinking waters. And I will say this was a time when there are jugs on the bar with glasses and you're filling up your water yourself, which I have never loved the idea of, and I don't love it even more now. And anyway, it gets too busy and everyone's getting super loose, and I actually decide to head home. I say goodbye to these people. I order an Uber. I leave the venue and I walk towards the part of the street where Ubers and cabs are picking people up. Then everything goes black from there. And this is where it gets quite difficult to listen to, so just be prepared. So when I come to, it's like someone has used a defibrillator on me. I jolt awake and everything is as clear as day and I am gasping for air. I'm splayed out, laying down on the back seat of a stranger's car. There's a man laying down directly on top of me. His full body weight is holding me down. My arms are pinned underneath him. He's pulled down my off-the-shoulder maxi dress that I had on, so it's now sitting around my stomach. He's also pulled down my strapless bra, so my boobs are out, and revoltingly, he's sucking me all over my chest area. And he actually left a full hickey bruise on me from that, which, as you'll find out, was quite a godsend, as it turns out. I start screaming. I'm saying, get the fuck off me. I remember there were several fucks in there. Get the fuck off me. I'm just letting out these blood-curdling screams of terror and anger. And my God, I summoned the power of 1,000 men and threw my body from side to side aggressively until I managed to get my hands free. People talk about the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is an automatic and instinctive reaction to danger. And it's weird because we joke about me being this slob kebab who hates adventure and being physical, etc. But for some reason, in emergencies, I get this extreme clarity and strength and I take charge, don't I?
Yeah, you really do, and I do not.
Yeah, it's weird. Anyway, I fought like an absolute motherfucker. And this guy, who I don't recognise, is trying to regain control and subdued me. So he's trying to hold my flailing arms down with one hand, and with his other hand, he's sort of pushing my head down and bashing my face with his hand. Because he's still laying flat on top of me, and my face and neck are the only areas of me that are exposed and moving around. I actually attempted to headbutt him at one point. I was trying everything I possibly could to get him off me with every ounce of my strength. And I'm just wailing and I'm literally fighting for my life. And then bizarrely, after a while, this scumbag of a man, I think literally just realises I'm going to be too hard to overcome, and he gives up. And he stops and he slowly gets up, he hops off me, and he gets out of the back of the car and he heads round slowly to the driver's seat. Well, I don't waste a second. I get up, I grab the strap of my bag, which is on the floor, thank God. It's in the back, it's splayed open, and everything flies everywhere when I yank it, and I just run. I've actually still got my shoes on because I was wearing a small wedge that did up around my ankles, my sturdy ankles. So they were secure and I could still get up a fair sprint in them. So I'm half naked with my bra and dress still hanging around my waist from where he's pulled it down. And I look back quickly as I'm bolting, and this man is just nonchalantly starting the car engine and driving off. And so I run and I run and I run, and it's pitch black. And I'm running through what I believe are the back streets of St Kilda. At this point, I'm thinking I'd left the bar 10 minutes earlier. I'd gotten into the Uber I'd ordered. I'd fallen asleep, which has never happened to me before. I'm very, very vigilant with that, not falling asleep in a vehicle that I don't know. And that my Uber driver has pulled over in a side street not far from the bar and come into the back and started assaulting me. So anyway, after running and running, I find a side street and I crouch down in a gutter between two cars and I'm hiding. And I start just bawling my eyes out and I'm trying to pull my clothes up and get my breath, and I just have no idea what to do. I can't process what's just happened, and my God, I'm fucking petrified. I'm petrified this man will find me and finish the job essentially because I've seen him. And I'm scared to contact anyone I know because I don't know how I got myself in this mess. And I'm thinking, fuck, Eliza, how could you be so stupid? So I look through my bag and half the contents are gone. My bank card's missing, which is my only payment method. But by some miracle, my house keys and my phone are still there. Again, a lucky moment in all of this. And in that moment, I'm not looking at anything on the phone. I'm just shaking and my face is swelling up from the assault and I can't really see or think properly and I'm really disoriented. Anyway, I try and call the friends I'd been out with. I call all of them and not a single one answers. I call over and over and nothing, which makes sense later, but in this moment it really doesn't make sense to me. And I absolutely couldn't call you, Lib. I was in a complete shame spiral. So I just decided to call a cab. The thought of that horrifies me, but I was of the belief that it was my Uber driver who assaulted me. So there was no way I was reordering an Uber and risking this guy coming back for me. I call the cab company and I walk to the corner of the street I'm on and I read out the names of the streets. I don't know these streets. I've never been there. The cab comes and I get in and I'm just utterly distraught. I'm really confused and bewildered, and this poor guy, he gets me home and I can't pay him because my bank card is gone and my phone doesn't have Apple Pay. So this lovely man says, just take my details, sort yourself out, and you can fix me up later, which is what I did. And again, God send that I have this guy's details, and you'll find out why later. So I sneak in the house, I rip off my clothes and I jump in the shower, and it's like what you see in the movies. I scrub the shit out of myself. I'm standing under the water, scrubbing and crying, which of course is the worst thing you can do. You want every bit of DNA left on you for the police. But I haven't processed what's happened and I'm still blaming myself, and I want to wash off the embarrassment and the shame that I'm currently feeling. I get into bed and I wake up around 10 a.m. and I am spiraling. I've realised what's happened and I immediately call Lib, who's at the supermarket. And I think I just said, Lib, I've been assaulted. I'm okay, but can you come home? Lib comes in the door and I get up and I just run to her and grab her, and we're just holding on to each other. Now, for context here, Lib and I never hug ever. And besides this moment, the only other time I could think of where we've hugged in our lives is after the block auction, and that was actually forced, to be completely honest. So we're just not affectionate, but I felt like I was clinging on for dear life. I've actually got photos I took of myself from that morning when I was waiting for you to come home, Lib. Can I show you, just to remind you? So if you scroll along, I've got swollen eyes and mouth from where I've been bashed.
I can remember this all.
And my lips are split from where my teeth have gone into them from the force of being hit. And there's bruising on my chest from this man sucking me everywhere. So if you scroll along, you'll see that horrific hickey. I know you were frustrated that I didn't call you for help the night before, Lib, but I knew my drinking annoyed you at that point because it was at a binge drinking level and I was deeply embarrassed. Even though I know now it wasn't my fault, I just carried so much shame and guilt in that moment, and I was like, how did I get myself into that situation? What do you remember from that morning?
So yeah, I remember this so vividly because every Sunday I would go to our local Woolies and I had done just that on this Sunday. And I remember walking around the supermarket and yeah, like you said, it was around 10 a.m. and you called me, and that was quite unusual for you when you'd had a big night out. Like you were the type of person that would stay in bed till like 4 p.m. the next day and I would maybe get a text from you at best, but you called me and I was like, this is weird. And I was probably halfway through my shop. And I just remember, you saying to me, like, you sounded really shaky and upset. And my immediate thought went to, oh my God, something's happened to mum or dad or whatever, because that was the only reason I could think of that you would be calling me and sounding so shaky and upset. And you just literally said something along the lines of, something happened to me last night. I'm okay. Like, you made sure to say, I'm okay, but can you come home and take me to the police station? And I just remember being like, oh my God, and are you okay? And I actually don't even remember what I did with my shopping or anything. That bit for me is a bit blank, but I just remember kind of leaving everything and coming straight home. And I remember, when you said before, I do want to correct you when you said I was frustrated. I was more upset by the fact that you didn't call me, because I think that for me was the most upsetting thing, because I was like, God, even your reasoning behind that of saying, your drinking was an issue for me at the time. I was like, shit, the fact that you didn't feel comfortable enough to call me when like something so horrific had happened to you, like really upset me, because it made me think that like, wow, the fact that you like couldn't call me in a moment where you were so scared and like alone and things made me feel like shit about myself. And I don't want to make it about me, but made me feel like shit about myself. And it just made me go, wow, you would have preferred to have literally been alone than to call me because of how you thought that I would react. So for me, and like I'm obviously getting upset about it now, I was just devastated about that, because I don't know, I would like to think that, I could call anyone in my family in that situation, and just the fact that you didn't feel like that really devastated and hurt me. And the fact that, you kind of figured a way to come out alone, like went to bed alone, didn't even wake me up when you got home, and then woke up alone in the house when I wasn't even there. Just I guess was confronting for me and upsetting for me to know that you were going through that all alone. And I just remember like walking through the front door and just kind of like bracing myself. I just remember like leading up to the door and like almost taking a deep breath, being like, wow, what am I about to walk into and how do I respond? I've never, as you said before, we've been quite lucky in how we've lived a pretty blessed life. We haven't had a lot of, death or horrific things happen in our life. So I remember just being like, okay, what do I do in this situation? Particularly because, like you said before, like I feel like I'm not someone that's very good in a crisis. So I was quite anxious, and I just remember walking in and seeing your face and your bruised lip, and it was just so horrific for me to see, because you'd said you were okay, but then when I saw you, it was so clear that you weren't okay. And I just remember us for a second sitting on the couch and just like literally embracing each other and not knowing kind of I didn't know what to say or do. I just think I kept saying like, are you okay? And kind of what happened, which what happens probably not the right thing to say in that moment, because it's probably, it's up to you to talk about that. But I had this thought as well around how we're not touchy-feely people, but like those couple of days that we had was the most touchy-feely we've probably ever been. And I just remember sitting there and holding your hand, and then you can keep going from there.
Yeah, and I just want to say that like it wasn't you personally. Now upon reflection, I know it wasn't my fault. I would absolutely call. But in that moment, I knew that I was living a certain lifestyle where I was coming home late and, you know, I was drinking and there was no doubt in my mind that what had taken place was my fault. And I just needed to work out how I was going to break to everyone that I'd allowed something like this to happen to me because it was my fault and I'd put myself in this situation. So I couldn't see you, and I was worried about even seeing my friends as well because how was I going to explain, oh my God, you guys, look, how fucking stupid have I been? Look what I have got myself
Yeah, and see,
into.
that's horrific that you're saying that. And I don't also want to say, I don't want to make you feel bad by me saying this. I'm just purely saying how I feel. And it's more so my guilt around the fact that I know you're saying you're in a shame and you were, or, you know, you're in this spiral and all of that. But I'm like, I just feel like regardless, I should have made you feel comfortable around me enough to, regardless of how you felt, call me.
It wouldn't have mattered because I was mortified. I was like, how do I face everyone I know and love? Because I feel like they'll say, I told you so. There was no reasoning with me around that.
But you don't believe that now that you've had time
God,
to...
no. I do not believe that at all. No. It's hard, I will say, because, you know, if I didn't go out that day, it wouldn't have happened. So,
but that's like anything you can say in life.
Absolutely.
What if, like...
But I was, you know, I was drinking water. I was doing all the right things, and we sometimes we just can't control what happens to us. And
exactly,
it wasn't my fault 100%. And if I had my time again, I would call you.
Yeah.
That was just not the mindset I was in, which is horrific that as women, that's where we go to. Were we wearing something provocative? How did we contribute to this situation? But as well, I had so many unanswered questions at that point. So as questions got answered, I was able to realise it wasn't my fault fully and wholeheartedly. So anyway, I asked Lib to take me to the police station, which happens to be very close by, and I drive past it every day. It's around 10:30 a.m. and we head into the station. We go to the front desk and we ask to speak with someone, and it's obvious from looking at my face that something's happened. And we wait until someone's able to see us, which is a while from memory. A lady comes out and she ushers us into an interview room. There's a desk and a computer, and we sit down, and the first thing this detective says to us is, "Sorry for the wait. It's been such a busy weekend for sexual assaults. This tends to happen when it's a long weekend and the weather is nice." Now, that was quite a disheartening start, if I'm completely honest. I don't know what would have helped to hear in that moment, but I sort of felt like I was an inconvenience and an annoyance and one of many, many people she'd had to deal with that day.
You were a number.
I was just a number. Anyway, we sit there and we go over every second of the day and night while a report gets written up. And Lib, you'd remember this, we go over and over and over the report. And there's icky questions like, what are you wearing? How many drinks did you have? Did you leave your drink unattended, etc.? Which I get, but also I kind of felt like I was being interrogated and judged. Did you ever get that feeling like I was the one on trial having to prove this really happened, or am I being sensitive?
100%.
And I do get it because, you know, if this makes it to court, you have to have all those answers. But I felt a bit gaslit.
Well, and I think that all kind of all makes sense as well.
Correct. As we go through this. So at this time, I'm still very confused about what's happened and where and why. And, you know, I'm thinking I've stupidly fallen into a deep sleep, which, again, has never happened to me before, in the Uber, which I've ordered from St Kilda. And 10 minutes later, I've jolted awake with the driver on top of me. And I hadn't got the car's rego because I was bolting for my life. And I thought I had the driver's info recorded in my Uber app. You know, it was my Uber driver who did this, simple as that. Anyway, the police officer is writing down the Uber driver's information. And I say, I also have the cab driver's details who dropped me home because I wasn't able to pay him. And the detective decides to call him in front of me so we can work out where exactly in St Kilda he picked me up from and at what time. Well, as I mentioned, it was actually a godsend that I couldn't pay this man and had to take his details because what he recounted was significant and quite shocking, to say the least. In that phone call, he says, I didn't pick her up in St Kilda. I picked her up in Hawthorn, which is about 25 minutes drive from St Kilda. And it wasn't midnight. It was 4:30 a.m. Now, that was truly horrifying and chilling for me to hear. I mean, no wonder none of my friends were answering my calls. They were home asleep. And you know what? First and foremost, I felt really stupid that I didn't know this, that I hadn't paid closer attention to the time on my phone, but also I'd literally just been attacked, so it just wasn't a priority. Then I started to process the information that I left the bar just before midnight, feeling clear and sober. Then I was out cold for 4 whole hours, and then I came to super abruptly with no recollection of what had happened. And I said to the detective, I've been drugged. With absolute clarity, I've been drugged. This just isn't normal. I know my drinking behaviours. I have no memory. Like, this is too strange. I was drinking slowly. I was tracking my drinks. What I said I drank was a perfect match to what was charged to my bank account. I was having waters. I ate food. And my memory before and after the assault was so vivid. I've never passed out or blacked out before. And she said to me, and I will never forget this, you were there, Lib. She said, everyone thinks they've been drugged. And then she started saying things to me like, it was a warm day. The drinks could have gone to your head. Sometimes we drink more than we remember, etc. So I just shame spiraled again and was thinking, oh my God, what will my parents think about me getting myself into this situation? God, I just felt so ashamed I'd let this happen. It was completely my fault. And can I say, and this sounds sick, utterly sick, I was actually glad I had injuries to show for the event, because I'd started to worry nobody believed me. I actually felt like I was going insane. So after 5 hours at the police station, we went back to our apartment so the detective could bag up all my clothing and belongings as evidence. And then we drove to the women's hospital. And on the way there, Lib was driving. I had to make the hardest phone call of my life, and that was to our parents, because our dad is extraordinarily overprotective, and this is his worst fear.
Yeah.
So I actually called them and I said, I'm about to FaceTime you. I've been assaulted, but please don't be scared by what you see because I'm okay.
And I was there too to make sure that they knew that you were okay.
And that was truly horrific. Do you remember?
Mm-hmm.
I think I could physically see our dad's heart breaking in front of me. But they were amazing. They didn't make me feel judged. They were just so glad I was okay, of course. But I knew that when I hung up, they were just going to die inside. I just knew that they were just probably not going to be the same again. So I met with a forensic doctor at the hospital, and that was exactly like the movies too. It was a big, cold, clinical, sterile room. I had to take my clothes off and be photographed and have my bloods taken. I actually insisted on having bloods, even though they were assuring me it was highly unlikely I'd been drugged. I had vaginal and anal swabs. My God, it was like truly so horrific. But I wanted all of the tests. And at this time, I actually wasn't sure whether I'd been raped. So I started spiraling about, oh my God, could I be pregnant? The things that go through your head anyway, they make sure you're tested for STDs, etc., which is good. So the reason we eventually came to the conclusion that I hadn't been raped, and I can laugh about this, and it's another lucky aspect of my story, is because on the night of the assault, I was wearing the biggest, tightest granny undies. I could barely get them up and down myself when I was going to the toilet. They covered like 40% of my lower region. They essentially sat up at my chin.
They were like spank undies, kind of.
Now, when I came away from the assault, my undies were still up and in position. They still sent my underwear away for DNA testing, but the doctor and detective concluded that there's no way the assailant could have removed my Spanx and then made the 10-person effort of pulling them back up in place after a rape. So these Nana undies were my life-saving little chastity belt, and I'll be forever grateful that I chose to wear them that day. In entirety, between the police station and the hospital, it was an extremely draining 12-hour ordeal in the end. Would you say?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so in terms of the days following, it was a long weekend, so I decided, given I had the Monday off, that I would be okay to go back to work on the Tuesday. I actually wanted the distraction. I didn't like being left alone with my thoughts. I kept trying to remember things from the blackout period, but also I kind of didn't want to remember. So my brain was playing this intense ping pong with itself. And over that time, every night, you'll remember this, I was sleeping on the couch in our living room with all the lights on and with the TV on. I liked all my senses being stimulated so my head didn't have space to drift back to that night. And really weirdly, I think you know what I'm about to say, I became super obsessed with Law and Order SVU. Which you're actually a bit, I shouldn't laugh, but you're a bit concerned about it. I was watching marathons of Law and Order SVU, which when you look at it, it's quite cooked. But the stories on there were so much more dramatic than mine. You know, most people on there are raped and killed. And as awful as it sounds, it made me feel better about my situation. I threw away all my old sheets. I got new ones and eventually I moved back into my room again, but I needed to sleep with the lights on for about a year afterwards, I think. And that's just because I never wanted to wake up in pitch black. I wanted to wake up and immediately know where I was. So I let significant people at my work know what had happened to me. And of course, everyone was incredible. You'll remember that time. But it was tough. I walked into the office on the Tuesday after my assault and saw one of my colleagues. And by that time, my fat lip had bruised into the shape of a handprint on my mouth.
Oh, that's right.
Because of, you know, this man hitting me. And when my male colleague spotted me, I remember he burst into tears. He has a young daughter, so it was like the biggest fear he had for his child standing in front of him. And also quite horrific was that 5 days after my assault, I had my very first mental health speaking engagement scheduled. I remember you dropped me to that. So I work with an organisation called Batia and we go into schools and I talk about my lived mental health experience. When I was 21, I had really bad anxiety and depression, which I worked very hard to overcome. And when I turned 31, so 10 years later, I decided to use my story to help others. And I'd spent so long preparing for this first talk and I considered cancelling it, but I thought, absolutely fuck that. I'm not going to let my perpetrator take this moment away from me. And even though it was so incredibly difficult to get up in front of these students and talk about my inspiring mental health journey when I'd just been through, you know, to hell and back, it was the most empowering reminder of what I've already been able to overcome in my life. And I was so proud of myself for getting through those few hours. And I'm really glad I did it. I also had my best friend's hen's party within a week of the assault, which again was so hard because you're trying to be jovial and excited. But I was completely shattered and lost. I didn't drink. I didn't partake in any games. I just sat in the corner feeling like the wind had been knocked out of my sails. And I felt like that for quite a while. And I'm still to this day so mad at this man for robbing me of those precious happy times. Now, a lot of what took place was exactly like you see in the movies, but where this is not like the movies is a lack of communication and urgency with my investigation. Updates came in very slow dribs and drabs. At one stage when I followed up, I actually got an apology. The department dealing with my crime is called SOCIT, I think that's how you pronounce it, which stands for the Sexual Offences and Child Abuse Investigation Team. And apparently they were dealing with a huge pedophile case at the time or something quite dramatic. So all hands were on deck there. And so, of course, I was very understanding. They're dealing with children. I mean, the things these police officers must deal with day to day, it's just horrific. So for the first 6 weeks, I actually heard nothing from the police. After that, I'd get an update every 3 months or so when I requested it. And you can probably imagine that I'm thinking throughout this time, oh my God, where is this guy? Is he going to find me and kill me? I was a fucking head case. What did come to light slowly over the next 6 months was the following. The person who assaulted me was in fact not my Uber driver. There's vision of me walking straight and soberly and unaided down a big staircase, exiting the bar on the night in question. I've seen that vision. I then walk over to the car pickup area. That's what I remember up to. From there, I have no memory. But this vision shows that I don't hop into my Uber. Apparently, I don't bother waiting for the Uber. I jump into an available cab. That's where the footage ends. I was told they were tracking down this cab driver because they had his rego, but he was a private contractor for the cab company and they were finding it difficult to work through the privacy legalities to get the driver's details, which was obviously highly frustrating. And this presented more questions than answers, really, because the car I jumped out of after the assault was a normal black vehicle, not a cab. I was also informed that my bloods came back clear. So no ethanol, which is alcohol, was identified. Now, alcohol only lasts in your system up to 12 hours, and the tests were done just outside that window by the time we got to the hospital. So there being no alcohol detected isn't hugely shocking, although if I had so much alcohol to the point of blacking out, which is what the detective semi-insinuated, would alcohol potentially still be detectable in my system? Look, maybe not. I don't know. I'm not an expert. I also still don't know what they tested for outside of alcohol, but based on research I did, popular date rape drugs like GHB, for example, aren't detectable in blood for very long afterwards. So again, I wasn't overly surprised my bloods came back clear. In excellent news, though, they were able to extract a male DNA profile from my strapless bra. So saliva had obviously stuck to my bra from all the sucking he'd done of my chest. Annoyingly, he didn't come up in the national database, but if he ever does reoffend, we've got him. I will say there were moments throughout this whole ordeal that I questioned whether the ongoing trauma from reporting the incident was worth it. Each time the police called or emailed me, my stomach would drop and I was filled with dread. And I was so frustrated with the lack of progress and the lack of urgency. I felt like if I wasn't chasing, my case would have fallen off the radar completely. Now, I honestly don't want to sound like I'm having a go at the police here. I truly believe they were doing their best given the thousands of cases they were dealing with, including cases with children, which are just, so important. They were just so clearly overworked and under-resourced. But you know what? At the end of the day, knowing we had this guy's DNA on file and that we had him metaphorically cornered for the rest of his life did really outweigh the pain of the whole process. Now, 6 months into the investigation of my assault, I was informed that the detective on my case had been moved to another department. I don't know why. And a new detective senior constable had been appointed to my case. When this happened, the ball started rolling again. The new detective stuck her heels in and tracked down the driver of the cab I jumped into when I was leaving the bar, the one I got into instead of the Uber. Speaking to him was going to help unlock how I went from his car at midnight to a strange black vehicle 4 hours later. So I remember I was in a Bunnings car park when this new detective called me. She said her and a colleague had brought in the cab driver and they'd spoken to him, and that the driver remembered our encounter very clearly, even though it had taken place several months earlier. I reckon maybe 7 months at this point. He said, I jumped into his cab and I was absolutely fine. Then within 5 minutes, I started convulsing, speaking in tongues, and that my arms and legs started tightening and spasming. Apparently, I became super paranoid and I jumped out at the traffic lights of a main road in St Kilda and I ran off. I mean, that's not me in my right mind. Then the detective said to me words that will stick with me also in a good way. And I know that sounds weird. Eliza, the colleague I had with me, has a lot of experience in this field, and she believes it's safe for us to conclude, based on this description, that at some point throughout the night you were spiked with the illegal date rape drug GHB. She said, in particular, the limb spasming and the convulsing, etc., was a textbook GHB reaction. Now, I've since learnt a lot about GHB. It's the date rape drug of choice amongst sexual offenders, or as the BBC referred to it in an article, a rapist's weapon of choice. It usually comes as a clear and odourless liquid, making it near impossible for a victim to identify. It sedates victims to a point where they don't have the power to resist an assault, and also they often don't remember the events that occur. According to a bunch of research I've done, GHB is difficult to pick up on drug tests because of the short detection windows and because most standard drug tests don't test for the presence of GHB. Apparently, very few people test positive for GHB even when they've used it. Super fun fact. It was originally developed to be used as an anaesthetic, as it's a central nervous system depressant. This means that it slows down the brain activity and creates drowsiness. So the effects of GHB start anywhere from 5 to 20 minutes from consumption and last up to 4 hours. So it hits quick, which explains why I went from absolutely fine to paralytic in minutes and then was catatonic for those missing blank 4 hours. It's also apparently very easy to overdose on GHB, especially if taken with alcohol. Even small amounts can cause some people to overdose. Unwanted effects of the drug include disorientation, incoherence, convulsions, loss of coordination, dizziness, confusion, hallucinations, memory loss, blackouts, seizures, and unconsciousness. Tick, tick, tick. An overdose can also cause a stroke or cardiac arrest. It is so fucking dangerous, this stuff. And it's so fucked that it's out there and ripe for these predators to use, because I'm going to be blunt here, it's the perfect ingredient for the perfect crime, really. It's sick. And it makes me so mad that someone gave it to me without my knowing or permission. I choose not to take party drugs like this. 1, because I don't want to be out of my head. And 2, because I'm on other medication that cannot be mixed with certain substances that could literally be lethal for me. So this fuckwit who spiked my drink could have killed me then and there in that bar within minutes. Now, unfortunately, given 6 or so months had passed since my assault, any dash cam footage from the cab or from security cameras in the area I jumped from the cab was long gone. So too was any CCTV footage from inside the bar, which is where my drink was spiked. And that really upset me because not only was valuable evidence potentially lost, but I'd been made to feel like my suspicions of drink spiking were bogus at the time I reported my case. I knew something wasn't right and I felt so fucking validated and relieved when I was told I had been drugged. It enabled me to finally see and accept that this wasn't my fault. The detective believed after I jumped out of the cab that I came across the wrong people or person who put me in their car after finding me on a street somewhere, potentially unconscious, and drove me 25 minutes away to Hawthorne and did God knows what with me and to me for 4 hours until I came to. So I was certainly unlucky that night in that my drink was spiked and that I later came into contact with another really bad human who attacked me. And we do believe these are 2 unconnected parties. But I'm lucky in that I crossed paths with certain people that night who could help us put puzzle pieces together. And lucky, of course, in that I wasn't killed, plain and simple. Sadly, there has been no further updates on my case, and the last time I heard from police was in December 2021. I'm not sure if you know this, Lib, but I emailed the detective in 2023 when I was going on the block to check again if it was okay for me to discuss this matter on camera if it came up, but I never got a reply.
That's good.
And the matter never came up on camera, so that was that. And, you know, it does make me sick thinking about this guy potentially watching the blog and following us on socials, knowing what he did to me. But I try not to let it consume me. I'm generally able to dismiss thoughts like that pretty quickly. Anyway, my case remains open and unsolved, and all of the documentation is filed away indefinitely, awaiting a possible DNA match. I obviously hope we catch this pig, but I don't want it to be because of another assault or at the expense of someone else's suffering. I want to finish off by talking about my recovery. So I never had nightmares or flashbacks. I've never recalled anything from the 4 hours that I don't remember. I'm not triggered by men or Ubers. I've never struggled going back to the venue where my drink was spiked. Obviously, I'm hyper aware of drink spiking and, having a water from a jug that's been sitting out on a bar. And I always will be very paranoid about all of that. But overall, I bounced back well. I was able to have urgent sessions with my personal psychologist, who I've seen routinely for many years. I'm very proactive with my mental health, and I think that significantly contributed to my resilience post-assault. Interestingly, when I saw her straight after my assault, the first thing she said to me when I described my experience was, "My goodness, Eliza, you've been drugged." And she knows her stuff, this lady. She's dealt with a lot of cases like this. And we'd had discussions about my drinking habits in the past. But no, my initial detective told me it wasn't possible, so I didn't entertain that as a possibility. And I carried a lot of self-blame and shame initially, which we had to work through. I also accepted help from a government-funded counselling service. So I was able to utilise free sessions at Casa House. I think that's how you say it, Casa House. Here in Melbourne, which stands for Centre Against Sexual Assault. Astoundingly, though, there was a 3-week waitlist for me to see someone there after my assault. And I was utterly devastated thinking about all the people who may not have the support that I did, who were potentially suffering in silence, that didn't have access to or the finances for private physicians like I did. And they're just sitting and waiting for help in their most vulnerable and fragile time of need. Even more alarmingly, I Googled wait times for Casa House now, and I found an article dated 2022. That was the most recent information I could find. So in 2022, this article stated that survivors of sexual violence in central Victoria at that time were waiting up to 7 months for services, and more than a third of the people on the Casa House wait list at that time were children. They were quoted as saying they needed more than double the existing level of funding to cope with the increasing demand. Now, Lib, in my first session at Casa House in 2019, the counsellor handed me a piece of A4 paper and she said, "We just need you to be across the brutal and unfair reality of the situation you're in here." And on the A4 paper was an upside down triangle, and on this triangle was a bunch of statistics. Looks like this. I took a photo of it and I just showed Lib. And at the top, across the thickest part of the upside down triangle, it says, number of sexual assaults, unknown. Number of sexual assaults reported to police, 18.9%. And then the triangle gets narrower and narrower as we move to the tip. People proven guilty, 0.9%. And finally, people in custody, 0.7%.
Wow.
I just don't really have words for how fucked up those statistics are. According to the latest Bureau of Statistics figures, in Australia, 22% of women, which is 2.2 million females, have experienced sexual violence since the age of 15. In 2023, there were 36,318 victims of sexual assault recorded in Australia, an increase of 11% from the previous year. Family and domestic violence-related sexual assaults made up 39% of all sexual assaults reported to police, and sexual violence remains a highly underreported crime. No fucking wonder when you're handed a triangle and told there's a less than 1% chance that your perpetrator will be held to account. Violence against women and children is an epidemic. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And as we discovered in our election episode last week, it's all well and good that we have this 10-year national plan to end violence against women and children in place. But since the introduction of that plan in 2022, the issue has worsened. An SBS article reported that in 2022, 56 women were killed due to gender-based violence. In 2024, it was 78. The most recent budget failed to offer any immediate solutions, and there don't seem to be any immediate solutions on offer as we head into the election. So where does this leave us? A lot of the commentary I've read suggests the government is failing to match the scale of this national emergency, that significantly more funding is needed for frontline services and across response and recovery programs, which is where the critical work is done providing support to victim survivors like myself. All I can do personally is keep being vocal, as I've started to do here today. I obviously wish this hadn't happened to me and that I didn't have this experience to talk about, but I hope conversations like this are a catalyst for change. And I desperately urge people to report these crimes. Shit, it was hard, but I'm so bloody glad I did it, because we've got to try and hold this scum of society to account and try to stop them hurting other people. I also want to add that a huge silver lining of this very dark time in my life was that our relationship blossomed. I know I've expressed my appreciation in the past, Lib, but I want to thank you again for being the person I needed in that time, which was a caring, comforting, non-judgmental sister. And I want to apologise to you for the trauma that this event has caused you, because I know it took a toll, and I know sometimes it still does impact you. And that's the end of what I want to say. I will add, if this discussion has brought up anything difficult for anyone, please know that A, you're not alone, and that there are places you can reach out for support. You can contact 1-800-RESPECT. It's the National Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence Counselling Information and Support Service, and that number is 1-800-737-732.